Welcome to the Deep Dive. Ready to go deep on the history of wireless communication?
Absolutely. It's a fascinating journey.
You know, it's funny, we use wireless tech every day, but most of us have no idea how we got here.
Right. It's like magic just works.
Exactly. So today, let's break the spell and uncover those aha moments, those surprising inventions that led to you having Wi-Fi on your phone. Think of it like a detective story, right?
Love that analogy. We've got clues scattered throughout history, and we're going to piece them together.
And trust me, some of these clues are seriously unexpected.
Yeah.
Who knew it all started with light?
It's true. Back in 1880, Alexander Graham Bell, the telephone guy, he invented this thing called the photophone.
The photophone. Okay, that name sounds straight out of a sci-fi movie.
Right. But picture this. Instead of wires, your voice travels on a beam of light. That's the photophone in a nutshell.
Wow, 1880. Talk about ahead of their time. Okay, so we've got light as our unlikely hero, but then things really take off with Marconi, right?
Absolutely. Guglielmo Marconi, often called the father of wireless. Late 1800s, early 1900s, he's making waves, literally. 1896, he sends the first radio transmissions. Now we're talking simple coded signals, Morse code stuff, and they only traveled about a mile.
Okay, a mile isn't that far, but hey, gotta start somewhere. So what happened next? Did he invent a better antenna or something?
Marconi was on a roll. By 1899, he'd sent a signal across the English Channel. That's about 31 miles.
31 miles. Cough water. Now that's impressive.
It was huge EE. Think about the limitations back then. No internet, no satellites, and suddenly you're sending signals across the sea. Mind-blowing.
Okay, from 1 mile to 31 in just 3 years. That's some serious progress. He didn't stop there, though, did he?
Not a chance. Marconi, he was determined to go even bigger. 1901, he does the unthinkable, sends a signal across the Atlantic Ocean. Over 3,000 kilometers?
Whoa. From a mile to spanning the Atlantic in just 5 years. That must have been a serious we did it moment. But did everyone suddenly start sending wireless messages across the ocean?
Well, not quite everyone, but one event in 1912, it tragically showed just how important wireless communication could be. The sinking of the Titanic.
Right, a truly heartbreaking moment in history.
The Titanic, it had a wireless telegraph on board, allowed them to send out distress signals as it was sinking.
And those signals, they were picked up by other ships.
Exactly. Faint as they were, those signals were picked up, and that's how hundreds of survivors were rescued. Imagine if those distress calls couldn't have been sent.
It's hard to even think about. So, in a way, this wireless technology, it saved lives.
Absolutely. The Titanic tragedy, it was a turning point. Suddenly, everyone understood. Ships, they need reliable wireless communication. No more debating if it was important or not. It was a matter of life and death.
And that led to some of the first regulations around wireless technology, right? Like requiring ships to have it.
Exactly. The impact was huge. But the story doesn't end there. Not even close. From those simple dots and dashes, things are about to get a whole lot more musical.
So from a beam of light, we get global communication, a life-saving technology.
Wild, right? Amazing, isn't it? But, the story doesn't stop there. Remember those simple signals, the dots and dashes we talked about?
Yeah, Morse code. Pretty basic stuff.
We'll get ready for a big jump, because things are about to get musical.
Musical? What do you mean?
Just a few years after that transatlantic transmission, 1906, the first audio broadcast, music and voice, sent from shore to a ship.
No way. So sailors out on the open ocean are hearing music floating through the air.
Can you imagine? It must have seemed like magic.
From dots and dashes to actual music in 5 years, that's mind-blowing. It must have seemed impossible, like something out of a dream. Did it stop there?
Of course not. By 1915, AT&T figured out how to send speech all the way from Virginia to Paris.
Across an ocean, again. Today, it's easy to forget how revolutionary that was. So we've got music floating to ships, we've got transatlantic phone calls. When does the radio, like what we think of sitting in our living rooms, come into the picture?
That's where things get really interesting. World War I, regular broadcasts of weather information using Morse code were becoming more and more common. And then between 1917 and 1919, there were huge advancements in sending clear music, voices, even full speeches over the airwaves. This is when radio really started to take shape.
Okay, so picture this. It's the 1920s, you're hanging out with your friends. Suddenly, someone turns on a radio. The first public radio stations launched in 1922, first in France, the UK, then they were popping up everywhere. By the mid-1930s, you had them in Malaya, Singapore.
It was a whole new way to experience the world.
It's easy to forget now, but before radio, you had newspapers, which could be days or even weeks old.
Right, or word of mouth, which, let's be honest, isn't always reliable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Suddenly, with radio, you could hear about events as they were happening, almost in real time.
It was a game changer. For news, for information, for connecting with the world.
It's amazing how something we take for granted today, listening to the news in our cars, completely revolutionized how people lived and saw the world back then.
Absolutely. And even as radio was taking off, someone was already thinking, what if we could make it even better?
Better? How?
Yeah.
The sound quality.
You got it. Enter Edwin Armstrong and his invention of frequency modulation. We know it as FM radio, 1935.
FM radio. Okay, so how did that make things better?
See, AM radio, yeah, it was groundbreaking, but it was prone to static and interference. You ever get that crackling on a bad radio signal?
Oh, yeah. Super annoying.
That's AM, FM. It offered a much clearer, crisper signal, meaning you could actually enjoy music, the news, without it sounding like you were listening through a tin can.
Right. We're so used to clear audio now, but back then, switching from that scratchy AM to clean, static-free FM, it must have been mind-blowing.
Absolutely. And, these leaps in quality, they're easy to overlook, but think about it. Clearer audio meant more engaging news broadcasts, more enjoyable music. It changed how people experience radio. But that desire to innovate, to push the boundaries even further, it didn't stop there. Remember how we started with light?
Yeah, the photophone.
Right. Well, hold on to your hats because things are about to get visual.
Visual. Wait, you don't mean...
We've talked about transmitting sound, but moving pictures. That seemed impossible for the longest time. But in 1923... it happened.
The first television transmission. No way.
The very first one. It was blurry, probably flickered like crazy, but hey, it was a start.
I can picture it now. Those old black and white images, everyone huddled around a tiny screen. It's kind of charming in a retro way.
It was huge. And throughout the 1940s, engineers, they were working tirelessly trying to make TV better, clearer. That's when the NTSC standard was developed. 525 lines of resolution at 30 frames per second.
525 lines. These days, that sounds practically prehistoric with our high-definition screens. But back then...
Back then, it was a revolution. And then, hold on to your hats, because this is a big one. In 1962, AT&T, they launched Telstar.
Telstar, that name rings a bell, wasn't that?
The first communications satellite capable of relaying television signals. Remember how Marconi connected continents with radio?
Yeah, it was huge.
Telstar, it did that for television. Broadcasts beamed across the globe in an instant. A whole new era. For television, for global communication, everything changed.
Wow, from those tiny, flickering screens to global satellite transmissions. Mind-blowing. But hold on, we got to talk about mobile phones. And Wi-Fi.
You're right. How could we forget that? Remember those giant car phones?
Oh yeah, like those old brick phones. Weighed a ton.
Those were basically the dinosaurs of the mobile phone world.
Yeah.
But hey, you can make a call from your car. That was the future back then.
Totally. So how do we go from those clunky car phones to the smartphones we have today?
Well, it all started back in 1946. The very first interconnection of mobile users to what we call the Public Switched Telephone Network. PSTN for short.
PSTN? Catchy. Okay, so what's next?
Well, now imagine trying to make a phone call. If everyone had different chargers, different technologies, chaos, right?
Total chaos. Nothing would work.
Exactly. That's why standardizing mobile phone networks was so important. It's like agreeing on a common language for all these devices.
So everyone's speaking the same language, their phones can understand each other. I got it. But how do we get from there to Wi-Fi? That's a whole other story.
It's a good one. So picture this. 1985, the FCC, they did something really interesting. They opened up a specific frequency band for what they called unlicensed use.
Unlicensed. So anyone could just start using it.
Pretty much. Companies could develop devices using that frequency band without needing a special license. And guess what? That decision opened the floodgates for innovation in wireless networking.
Okay, so how did we go from unlicensed use to me watching cat videos on my phone at 2 a.m., fill in the gaps?
Well, in the early 1990s, there was this company in the Netherlands, and they developed something called WaveLAN. It was essentially a wireless version of Ethernet.
Wireless Ethernet. So that's like really early Wi-Fi.
Got it. And you want to know the kicker? Back then, it was mostly used for things like cashier systems.
Get out. So Wi-Fi, it started at the checkout line.
Yep. Humble beginnings, right? And from there, Wi-Fi, it just exploded. The 802.11 specification, which is the standard for Wi-Fi as we know it, it was released in 1997. By 1999, it was getting faster, smoother, and they even formed a group called the Wi-Fi Alliance to make sure all these new Wi-Fi devices could actually work together.
Standardization. We talked about that. Everyone's going to play by the same rules.
Exactly. And speaking of 1999, I bet you can guess what else happened that year.
1999. Let me think. Oh, I know. Apple. They stepped into the game, right?
Bingo! 1999, Apple launched the iBook, their very first laptop with built-in Wi-Fi. And, well, let's just say Apple's pretty good at making technology look cool and easy to use.
Say the least. And just like that, suddenly everyone wanted Wi-Fi. It wasn't just for techies anymore. So there you have it. From a beam of light to the Wi-Fi we're using right now. What a journey.
It really goes to show the power of human ingenuity, right?
Absolutely. And the best part, the story's not over yet. Every single day, someone, somewhere, is working on the next big thing in wireless communication. The next time you connect to Wi-Fi, without even thinking twice, take a second to think about all those incredible inventions, all those brilliant minds that made it possible. You've been on a deep dive through the history of wireless communication. From beams of light to the world at your fingertips. Who knows what amazing breakthroughs are just around the corner? Thanks for listening.